Welcome to Hodgenville, Kentucky. Now, Illinois is known as the land of Lincoln because when he was in the state house and in politics, and when he ran for president, that was from the state of Illinois. So we're going to go there later. But right now we are in Kentucky because this is the town where Abraham Lincoln was born. And he was born here in 1809. And he left Hodgenville for Illinois in 1816. Let's leave this town square and leave the statue of Abraham Lincoln and head over to his actual boyhood home, the log cabin that Abraham Lincoln grew up in. Welcome to the cabin that Abraham Lincoln was raised in. Not only was he born in a one-room cabin, but his family moved to built this small cabin shortly after he was born. This is Pine Knob Creek, and over here, if you look just over there, you can see that's where the creek is. This is the only place that Abraham Lincoln remembers in Kentucky. His family attended a local Baptist church, a Christian denomination, and they were against dancing, alcohol, but most important, they were against slavery. Now, in this county that we are in, there were slightly more than 1,000 slaves, male slaves, and 1,600 white men. So the population of slaves was very high here. And this is the area that Abraham Lincoln would have first come into contact with slavery. And the church that he attended was actually believed to have been formed due to its opposing slavery. So think about this. This is the area that motivated Abraham Lincoln for his lifelong view, and this included him running for president, the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates that we'll talk about later, and the reason he was assassinated at Ford's Theater. So when you look around here, you know he grew up a very humble man in humble settings. You think about the house you might live in. Well, this is what he lived in. All right. We're not going to go to Indiana where he moved after Kentucky, but we're going to go to Illinois, which was the main place that he grew up and where he lived his professional life. We're going to learn more about Abraham Lincoln's life when we get there. Okay, we're now in Springfield, Illinois, the state capital of the state of Illinois, and this is the exact home that Abraham Lincoln lived in between 1844 and 1861, which is when he left Illinois and moved to Washington, D.C. to serve as President of the United States. So much of his adult life, he was here in the city of Springfield, Illinois, practicing as an attorney and then also serving in the state legislature. This is also where he raised his children, and it's where he lived with his wife, Mary Todd. So we're going to go down this way. If you take a minute, you can see this neighborhood has been preserved exactly as it was when Abraham Lincoln lived here. Hang on. So we're still in Lincoln's neighborhood, and if you look around, look over here and here, you can see that this neighborhood is preserved exactly as it was when Abraham Lincoln lived here. And now, why I'm showing you this, Abraham Lincoln did not believe in campaigning for himself. So when he campaigned for the State House and then the U.S. Senate and President, others would campaign for him. And so his neighbor, who lives just right here, had this carriage, this wagon, and he made this poster, and you can see it says People's Badge, Lincoln, Honest Old Abe, the People's Choice. I don't know how he felt being called Honest Old Abe, but Jesse Dubois, who also served in the legislature with him, would pull this around and campaign for Abraham Lincoln. And of course, Lincoln was his neighbor, living right over there, the house that we were just at, the brown house with the green shutters. So if you ever have a chance to visit Springfield, Illinois, and visit this preserved neighborhood, it's definitely a jump to the past. So we are in Charleston, Illinois today, and this was the location of one of the great Lincoln-Douglas debates. Now, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln ran for president. But before that, he ran for the U.S. Senate. And he ran against Stephen Douglas. Douglas was the candidate for the Democrats, and Lincoln was the candidate for the Republicans. Now, there were 9 of these debates across the state of Illinois. We're going to talk more about the debate in just a minute, but we're on railroad tracks, and these are the railroad tracks that Lincoln rode in on, because back then, to travel around quickly, you could either hop on a horse, walk, not so fast, or you could come in by train. There were 12,000 people that came to watch this Lincoln-Douglas debate. And understand, there are no speakers, there are no microphones. There was basically no electricity in 1856. And so they had to speak with their voice and project. So the other thing that I want you to know is that when Lincoln and Douglas ran for the U.S. Senate, they weren't elected by the people. They were elected by the state legislature. So when they were campaigning, they were actually campaigning to elect members of the state legislature, and whichever party got the most members elected to the state legislature, that was the party who could elect their candidate. So if the Republicans controlled the Illinois legislature, Abraham Lincoln would be the U.S. Senator. If the Democrats controlled the Illinois legislature, it would be Stephen Douglas. And in this particular case, we'll find out in just a minute who won. Okay, we're in Charleston, Illinois. The railroad tracks we were just at are about 100 yards that way. So we're at the train depot. And these were such famous debates and really political theater that thousands of people would come in from around the United States right here to this city. And there were 9 debates around the state of Illinois between these two men. Stephen Douglas, the Democrat, and he was the sitting U.S. Senator. And Abraham Lincoln, the Republican, who was a former congressman, former member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and challenging him in 1858. So, here's what the debate came down to. Stephen Douglas took the position that new states coming into the Union should have the right to vote to choose whether they wanted to be free or slave. Lincoln took the position that slavery was immoral and it should not be allowed in the United States overall, but especially it should not be allowed in any new states coming into the Union. Well, in that election of 1858, because they were campaigning for members of the legislature, because senators were elected by the legislature, they were not elected by the direct population yet. So Stephen Douglas ended up winning that U.S. Senate race because there were more Democrats elected to the legislature than Republicans. So Lincoln loses, but this debate made these two candidates so famous, it was carried in every major paper, that they ended up both running for president in 1860. And in that election, there were 4 candidates running. These were 2 of them. Lincoln, of course, wins and becomes president of the United States. Douglas comes in dead last. So things worked out for Abraham Lincoln. So you can see, we're here at the Lincoln Memorial. If you look up there, you can see the statue of Lincoln. It's a very respectful place, but after Lincoln defeated Douglas and others to win the presidency, he ended up facing what may have been the most consequential presidency in the history of this country. As you may know, Civil War broke out, and he had to make the decision whether to leave the country into 2 separate countries, the Confederate States and the United States, or to fight a war and bring the 2 back together. He had to make a decision whether to fire Rosecrans and put Ulysses S. Grant in charge. He had to make other major decisions and ultimately gave his Emancipation Proclamation, which set every slave in the United States free, whether they were in the Confederacy or the United States. Welcome to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We are in the park, the national park dedicated to the Battle of Gettysburg, the battle in the Civil War, where the most soldiers were lost, the most casualties were had. And we're here to talk about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which happened 4.5 months after the battle in November of 1863. It's interesting because Lincoln came here and he was not the main speaker. The main speaker stood up and spoke for 2 hours. And then Lincoln stood up and gave a speech with 271 words, 2 minutes long. And in doing so, he gave a speech that has been remembered throughout American history. And along with Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech and a couple of others, are the most remembered and respected speeches in American history. So I'm not going to talk a lot more, but we're going to pause here and listen to those 271 words. And as we do, you'll have a chance to look around the cemetery and understand all that was given in defense of freedom.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who died here, that the nation might live. This we may in all propriety do, but in a larger sense we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have hallowed it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, while it can never forget what they did here. It is rather for us, the living, we here be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve these dead shall not have died in vain, that the nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.